All right, guys, we got Reid Anderson today, who's an account executive at PandaDoc. He's actually one of the originals at the company, right at about 4 years now, and he's been crushing it since coming out of Praxis and starting at PandaDoc. So Reid, give us a quick story of where you came from and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Really excited to be on the show. Man, where I came from, that could be a whole show in and of itself. I'm not going to take up that much time though. So Spark Notes would be, I came through a program called Praxis, which I know there have been some previous guests on this show who also came through that. Me and Olivia, who I think is one of those guests, we were the first Praxis people to join PandaDoc. So we were the guinea pigs, as it were, at PandaDoc. And I came through Praxis. I'm originally from Minnesota. I got placed here, started as an SDR, and over the last 4 years, worked my way up from outbound SDR, strategic SDR into an AE position, which is what I've been doing for, it'll be about 2 years when 2021 hits.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite the career so far. And how old are you?
I am 29.
Nice. Yeah. So what did you do before this, and how did you like stumble into sales? I know Praxis was probably a big part of that, but walk us through your mindset and how it shifted.
Yeah, stumble's a good word for it. I had no intention of ever having a career in sales. And even when I was accepted into Praxis, I didn't really know what I wanted to do or what direction I wanted to go. So a lot of people who join that program, they know they want to get into operations or marketing or sales. They know they want to start as an SDR. I had no idea. I was open to maybe getting a little bit a taste of everything. And what they often do in that situation, because the SDR position is so flexible, and if you don't like it, you can pivot to a different department or you can stay on that sales track, is they said, all right, try SDR. And if you don't like it, you'll still have the flexibility to go somewhere else and try something new. So at that point, I was very much open to anything. Before Praxis, basically, my path, I wanted to go to grad school. A couple years out of undergrad, I really decided I didn't want to keep going to school, and my interests were very broad. I didn't want to be pigeonholed in some, subject for the rest of my life. But I had no idea what I wanted to do because all my eggs were in the grad school basket. And so that's when I found Praxis. Very lucky to do that. And then when they placed me at PandaDoc, kind of the same thing with sales, where I was just like, all right, I just want as much freedom to go in any direction at any given time. And after a couple months as an SDR, really took to it. And I think that's just increased over the last 3-4 years to where, I could see myself in sales for pretty much the rest of my life.
Yeah, man, that's good. And that actually leads me to one of my questions. Working your way up, like in the SaaS world, or we can just refer to it like PandaDoc in general. I know you mentioned like wanting to move in different directions. Like, what type of advice would you give to someone who's SaaS world or any industry that's new and kind of wants to work their way up or work their way towards a different role? How did you do that?
Yeah, man, I think just giving everything a fair shot, which is an obvious answer, but it really, because it can be very, even through all the, especially in sales, it can be very uncomfortable. And there are a lot of moments where in my head was thinking, man, I can't see myself doing this for that much longer or as a career. So why should I, keep doing this and wasting time? And, I've sunk all this time into it already. But I think really stepping back, looking at the longer term picture, and then understanding what you want out of a career too, obviously. So if you're super money motivated and that's your number one goal, obviously sales can be pretty lucrative. But I think that's also the advantage of working in SaaS at a more of a startup type company, where you do have that kind of flexibility, get an entirely new position. So I think that was also what was attractive with Praxis, was the BP that I was going to be working at. There's just a lot of flexibility to change direction within the same company if you like the company, but the role isn't necessarily a fit.
Yeah, we've talked about that previously too, that one of the nice things about working at PandaDoc is just having different directions you can go in. And I think that enables people to just become proactive and really focus on what they're good at. And it kind of works out for everyone. You end up doing something you want to be doing, and it benefits the company more because they've given you that opportunity to be in a role where you can ultimately doing what you're like doing more, and just works out overall for everyone. So
Yeah, Reid, I wanna jump into like your sales skills, I guess. One question I have for you is, how do you approach a call? Because I mean, I've had the luck of getting to shadow you sort of these past couple of weeks, and work closely with you, just on this outbound outreach that we're doing. So I was curious to know, are there any techniques that you specifically enjoy using or have found to be very helpful? And what is it like for you preparing for a call and starting to talk to a prospect from disco, throughout the whole rest of the sales cycle?
Yeah, I think, man, there's a lot of important things that go into, especially first calls, which is most of what you'll set a meeting for me, and then you'll sit in on that initial discovery. And you always want to have some kind of structure for your calls. You don't want to just go in completely and improv everything. You want to be structured, but also allow, because people are coming into it with different levels of intent, different levels of information about your company. And so you want to be flexible and allow for, if that person isn't ready to buy right away, the conversation, you're not going to ask them the same questions. You're not going to have the same checklist that you're looking to check off for your call. So I think you want to have some kind of structure to it, to where there's consistency, because if you're doing something wrong, you need to be able to go back in almost a scientific way and say, well, did I change something? Did I leave something out? I kept all these variables the same, so maybe it was just bad luck, or maybe I am forgetting to do something. So you need to be able to do that for comparison's sake, but you also want to, you don't want to be so wedded to the structure that you're ignoring what they're telling you or what their feelings are on the call, to where you just sound like a tone deaf, money hungry salesperson now, which is obviously is very easier said than done. So one thing that helps me a lot before a call is to do pre-call planning, which is you just go down and you, in your head or on paper, if that's easier, you can just write down all the questions that you're going to ask. And then in addition to that, you can kind of anticipate answers, anticipate potential objections based on, people who were like this person in the past who you encountered, and really just get an idea of, at every point in the call, okay, if it takes a turn in this direction, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? And just doing that kind of planning. It's pretty obvious, right? You're just planning for the call. But I think a lot of people do just, they go into a call and they think they're going to wing it and just have a conversation, and because they're sociable and people like them, they'll end up closing the deal. But I think with that, you do sacrifice a lot of you might forget to get certain information and those types of things. So it's that fine line between like structure but not being too structured that you sound like a robot.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
She's speechless.
She's speechless. Oh my God. Yeah, I can see how that plays out in the calls that I've witnessed you do recently. And one thing that you touched on that I think is really important to reiterate is, winging it is just never going to get you the same results as prepping, even a little bit, because of course you do need to be flexible. You need to have some sense of ability to improvise within the framework that you've set. But something that I'm finding on these calls is like, if I don't have my structure right in front of me and I think that I can just wing it, that's when I'm, connecting with someone, because it always happens when you're not prepared for it. You connect, and then, that's treasured because it's outbound and you're talking to them, and then they throw you this objection, and then you're not ready to handle it because you didn't have your process set up. It's like, and then you totally flub the call, or you just don't make the most out of it that you could have, getting information or booking, because you just didn't have what you needed. I'm sure that all kinds of different people feel differently about that, just because I'm a person who very much needs the structure. I'm sure there are people who can do with a little bit less, but obviously having something in place is going to get your results. It sounds like that's true for you. It's definitely true for a lot of other salespeople. So yeah, I think that that's really important, what you brought up, just to reiterate for new and old salespeople alike.
Right. And to double down on what you just new and old. So this is incredible. When you're new, it's, really, really important to have that structure, because otherwise you're just going to be all over the place. But I think it's easy to think once you've ramped and you're hitting a number for a bunch of months in a row, you can just, I don't need the structure this time. I don't need to use the framework. I can just kind of wing it. I'm pretty good at this. And yeah, you will close some deals, or you will, do whatever it is you're trying to do, book, from cold calls and that kind of thing. But you can get off track pretty easily. And yeah, I think it's just important for, no matter your experience, you always follow some kind of structure, some kind of process that that is consistent, so that yeah, your performance suddenly suffers, you can go back and make changes to it and actually look at something, rather than just kind of looking all around and not really knowing even where to start to try and fix whatever it is gone wrong.
Yeah, and it seems like that's what makes it repeatable action as well. Is like, because on any given day, you're going to have a different emotional mindset. You wake up, maybe you didn't sleep well. It's going to show in your tone, unless you've got that process in front of you and you can just like commit to it. And then when you go back, and if something goes wrong and you're just trying to assess, like, where did I falter this week? Where did I shine this week? And maybe it was Tuesday that I didn't sleep well. Well, I know at least that it was not my talk track, because it worked Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So it must have just been that I didn't sleep well and I just needed to get over it, that kind of thing. Versus maybe it is the talk track, because it wasn't working any day of the week, regardless of what I was bringing to the table as well. And there's a certain amount of fake it till you make it, but still, it's like having that structure to go back and look at is going to be the best way to scientifically approach sales and make it, so that every day, every week, every month, you're hitting your number.
Right. And on the other side of the coin, I'm really a big fan of analogies, and there's a lot of analogies between sales and baseball pitching specifically. So your structure in sales, say a framework for a call, it's kind of like your pitching mechanics. You want your body to move the same way every time, because when you deliver the pitch, even the slightest little difference, right? The strike zone is this big. It could be a ball, and you're in trouble. So on the other side of the coin, though, you don't want to become a slave to your mechanics, where that's all you're thinking about and you're not actually using your athleticism. And with the sales analogy, you're not being a person. You're sounding too much like a robot. You're just asking questions and going to the next question. You're not actually like bonding with someone and coming across as a genuine person, which is equally important. So you don't want to go too far in either direction.
Do you listen to your calls?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Very consistently. I listen to my calls, and especially if there's been a dip in performance, or I'm sensing something is off, I'll always go back and listen, and also have other people listen to them. It'd be like, when you're writing, a high school or college paper, or just you're writing anything, you want to get a second set of eyes on it, because they're going to notice things that you didn't, because you wrote it. So you're biased in that way. So I listen to them. I'll have other people listen to them to just, hey, do you notice anything? Am I coming across a different way, or did I miss any questions? And then also I listen to other people's calls almost as consistently. And I think that helps too, to just hear other people, because otherwise you're just hearing your own voice, and you're just in an echo chamber.
Yeah, sometimes like feel the same way, man. I like the baseball analogies too, especially because I pitched my whole life, so I try to relate it to that. But it's true. Like you can be doing really well in sales, and I think that's something that people don't realize creates really bad habits sometimes. Um, because every prospect's different, every situation's different, but you do still have to stick to certain mechanics. Um, so totally agree where you're coming from, man. Um, I know you said you listen to your calls. What are the things you look for when you listen to your calls?
Yeah, it depends on the reason that I'm listening to the call. So maybe I had a call that I knew was bad and I have a hunch of what I did bad. And so then I'll go listen to that specific part, get an idea of if I did actually screw up whatever that screw up was, and then think about how I could have done it differently. Also, if a call, say, or with a deal, I thought all my calls have gone really well and they go dark on me, or the deal turns out it doesn't work out the way that I want to in the end, I'll go back and listen to calls to see if there was anything subtle, more covert cues that I just missed on a call. Say, maybe I was getting happy ears and I wasn't listening as intently. So they said some things, no one wants to tell you no, right? So they'll do it in other ways that after being in sales for a long time, you should be attuned to, and you can either call it out or just know in your head, okay, chances of this one closing probably not that much. So I think one thing that I like to be able to do at any given moment is to be able to tell you what the chances are of a certain deal closing, regardless of what stage I have it in Salesforce. Not all stage twos, not all stage threes or fours. Well, fours may be different, but not all stage twos and threes are created equal. So, sometimes you'll put things in a stage and it's you're not as optimistic as something else that's in stage three. So I like to be able to identify those things. Not perfect, obviously. So I'll go back and listen for little clues or things, tones that they were using or questions that they asked. And another big thing with listening to calls is talk time. So that's the first thing I'll look at for just a random call that I listen to, is how much time I'm talking on the call. I try to keep it under 40%. I want them talking as much as possible, because no one's going to buy if you're just preaching at them. They have to come to the conclusion themselves that whatever it is you're offering them is going to help, and you get to that by letting them come to the conclusion and have them talk more. So that's the first thing I look at, would be the talk time. And let's say it's 60 or God forbid 70%. I'm listening to the whole call and seeing where I could have asked better questions and maybe where I blabbered on too much or feature pitch, those types of things.
Yeah, that's good, man. I like that rule of thumb too, for that percentage of how much you should be talking versus them. Of course, there's some cases where you end up talking more, or makes sense. But while we're on the topic of mistakes, can you tell us about a failure in your career and how you overcame that?
Failure. Would you believe me if I told you I was perfect?
Yeah, definitely, man.
All right. Well, I'm not. So I had to infuse some humor into this. Definitely not perfect. I would say, when I just started here, so it was about a month after I started at PandaDoc from the Praxis program. So I was still technically an apprentice or an intern. I was under contract. I wasn't salaried or anything. But very shortly after I started, there was an opportunity there was an AE position that opened up, and I was in consideration for it. I did not get it. And, there were a lot of circumstances at play. I don't really know how realistic it was that I could have been promoted to that role, but in the moment, that's what I believed, and it did feel like a failure in the moment, to where like, oh, I could have gotten this promotion and instead they picked someone else. And so I was definitely hung up on that for a while. And I think yeah, it was just a tough pill to swallow, especially because I was just starting out. And so something that I perceived as a failure at the time, when you're just starting out at a new company, it definitely had me down. I think the way that I got over it was almost using that same information, to where you just started at this company. You've never been in sales before. You've never been in tech or software before. So yeah, why should you have gotten promoted? And my attitude was basically, you know, that'll come, but for the moment, just be the best SDR, the best outbound SDR that you can possibly be. And there's a lot of things that, in hindsight now, I'm glad that failure, if you want to call it that, happened, because there's so many things that you learn as an outbound SDR that I would not have learned in that position, making cold calls every day, prospecting people, creating opportunities out of thin air. Basically, that's what outbound is. So I'm pretty glad that in hindsight, I didn't get that promotion and miss out on the opportunities to be an outbound SDR.
Yeah, definitely, man. And I think, at least to relate to that, there was a time not too long ago where I was hoping to get a position that got put off. And at first it's always like, damn, that sucks. And then as time goes by, you're like, okay, I get it. Like it starts to make sense. And from an emotional standpoint, at first, you don't really get it. But I'm thankful for that person every day, that they did make the decision to not put me in that role yet, because I've now realized that I wasn't ready for that spot, and no one wants to be set up for failure. So that's good. You took the high road and said, I'm going to be the best SDR I can, and I'll get there when I get there, because the alternative to that is just starting to mail it in because you feel like you were wronged. And where's that gonna lead you? So good stuff,
Yeah.
man.
The other thing about that too that I just want to add on, Andrew, is like I just love hearing that you were okay with being an SDR for a while, because that's where you learned so much. Because I think a lot of people overlook this role as, it's just the stepping stone. It's like, yeah, you have a lot of flexibility as an SDR to move into other positions. You're mastering sales in a more general sense, but it builds a lot of grit to be on the ground in a way that you're right, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to do in other positions. And I've never been an account executive, but I know that being an SDR is definitely making me stronger every day. And I don't know that I would be a successful account executive if I didn't have this under my belt. So yeah, I think that's an extremely relatable feeling that you had, especially coming out of school. It's like, I had this vision for my life. I did some whiplash and chose to go a different route. And now I'm doing this thing, and it's entry level, kind of, but I'm going to make the most of it, and I'm going to be the best version of that I can be, because there's a lot to learn here. And I think that'll help a lot of people feel uplifted, and hopefully not stuck where they are, but using it as the catalyst for the rest of their lives. I mean, the skills you build here today will serve you forever, in any career you choose, whether it's sales or not, because sales and grit are two of the best soft skills you can have in business. I mean, can't go wrong. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of motivation there to obviously maybe, show some people that maybe they should have considered me more. Or really, my attitude though was, yes, I'm so new at this position. I have a lot to learn here. I know what it takes I know some of the things you have to know as an AE that'll make you successful. And I can develop those skills now, so that when I do become an AE, right out of the gate, I'm going to crush it. So
Yep. And flash forward,
out.
now you are crushing it. Cheers. Awesome. Well, we got one last question for you, Mr. Reid there. I don't know why I said it like that. but we're gonna roll with it. What's
No editing.
no editing. What's one thing that anyone can do today, right now, to get better at sales?
Talk less. Wouldn't
That's
it be
it?
funny if I just didn't expound on it? No, I got some talk less. So I kind of touched on this with the call reviews. I mentioned how I look at the talk time. So that's one of my pet peeves is when people they give advice like that and like talk less or sell value or these kind of obscure things. And it's like, okay, well, how do I do that? So two things, because I used to be quite a talker, maybe as you've seen on some of the short little monologues I've done on this call already, but two things that you can do to help you in sales to talk less. One would be, first, I would just say, ask more open-ended questions. So get better at asking what and how questions for whatever it is you're offering, rather than questions that can be answered with a yes or no. So, do you think this would help you? You're going to get a one-word response, yes or no, and it's probably going to be yes because they don't want to tell you no. What good is that? Instead, ask, how do you think this would help you, or what do you think this would help you accomplish? Would be an example. Again, because people aren't, if you preach to someone, if you got a 70% talk time, that person's just going to nod their head and they're probably not going to get bought into the idea because you're just shoving it down their throat. They need to come to that conclusion on their own. And the way that you get that to happen is they have to do some talking on the call and create that aha moment themselves. Second thing, which coincides with the first, is learn to get more comfortable with silence. So even after I said talk less, when Brandy asked that question, you could tell it got a little bit uncomfortable. Brandy was like, what's going on here? Why isn't he saying anything? Am I going to have to ask another question after that? So that's on both sides of the call. Whoever you're talking to, they don't like silence. You don't like silence. And so what a lot of salespeople do is they ask close-ended questions. They get a yes or no response, and then they have to ask another question, and it's going to be close-ended. And so by the end of the call, your prospect has said a couple words and you've asked all these questions and feature pitched and your deal's dead. So learning to get more comfortable after you ask a question, just shut up. You can even turn your Zoom, you can mute yourself, flip your headphones up or whatever, but just zip it and let the person on the other side of the phone think a little bit, because believe it or not, they do have to do that. They are thinking about things. And let yourself think a little bit too. So when you're asking questions, I think what trips people up with this is that your entire life, a lot of situations where you're asking questions or you're answering questions is you get rewarded for speed and for the length of your response. So like in school, for example, you got to answer something quick. And if you're verbose in a written response or oral response or something like that, people are going to be impressed. A lot of the times in sales, that backfires. It's almost the complete opposite. So just be comfortable in silence. And you can even go so far as to just institute a policy of like, after you ask a question, even if the person doesn't respond after 5-10 seconds, you are not going to say anything until they respond. Just get to a point where you just relish it. And I think you'll make some big improvements. I know that's what happened to me. I was talking with Luke Ruffing. If you guys have had Luke on this show, right?
Not yet.
No, not yet. He's on the list.
All right. Yeah, you guys should definitely throw him on here. But we had a conversation that really sticks out many months ago. I think it was at the end of 2019. And he was talking about his talk times on calls, because I was, having some issues, and he pain funneled me on that. And we found out, I was talking too much. And he gave me some of these pieces of advice. And after watching his calls, I'd watch a lot of his calls. I'd see his talk times would be 30%, 20%. And it's, you listen to his calls and it's again, to go back to the baseball analogy, I think if you just take your average fan off the street and they watch a 1-0 or 2-0 shutout, they're going to think nothing happened, because your average fan, they don't really have an appreciation for pitching. They want to see home runs. They want to see people running around the bases and scoring. But really, if you do know what's going on, and say you're a pitcher like you are, Andrew, you can appreciate what's going on in a low scoring game. There's so many things, despite, the offenses being, not popping off and hitting home runs and stuff. And it's the same thing in a sales call. I think if you took your average person off the street, you show them one of Luke's calls, they'd be like, what the heck is going on? This guy isn't talking at all. Nothing is happening. There's no pitch. He's being awkwardly silent. And yet Luke is our top performing sales rep, has been for a couple of years now. So I think, if you're not bought into the idea that those things, just talking less and being silent, asking more open-ended questions, would help because it feels awkward, I would just look at your top performers, and dollars to donuts, like that's probably what they're doing, at least as compared to everybody else, is they're just talking less.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And I don't know, what do you think about the yeah, oh yeah, that kind of like responding? Because to me, hearing you talk about this, having heard Luke talk about it, what I've noticed on the phone when I stop talking but I do those things, it's the same thing as if I were saying things, because it stops the person in their tracks. It kind of halts their thought process, and it seems like I cut them off, even though to me it sounds like I'm just reassuring them that I'm still here and listening. So I stopped doing that, and it was like better. It was much better. Have you noticed anything like that before, or do you have an opinion about that?
100%. I'm still working on that. When I use these AirPods now, these fancy Apple AirPods, but what I used to use the Jabras, like I think you have on, and I would just literally flip, like you just did, that up, so that even if I did say the uh-huhs, the yeahs, those things, that make sure so the other person understands that you're listening to them, and that if we were face to face in person, would not be a big deal. But Zoom, as we all know, only one person can talk at a time. So you will interrupt their question, or they'll say, oh, what was that? And then they were going to go on a 2-minute rant about all the issues they were facing and give you all this information, and you just screwed it up. So yeah, that's really important. I was nodding my head when you were saying those things, fighting not to say yeah to interrupt you. So it's definitely a work in progress, but it does make a big difference, those little small things. So at the very least, if you have AirPods like me, or you don't have something you can just flip right now. So I said you can just mute yourself and you wouldn't hear me. I did that for comical effect, but yeah, that makes a huge difference.
The theatrics are strong with this one.
It kind of threw me off at first because I didn't even there was no look down to mute. You just kept going.
Yeah.
Wow. That's impressive, man. That's the most important thing I got out of all this. We tried it.
Yeah, we should all try it. Just go on mute for the rest of this call. 5 minutes.
See,
silence.
it's real easy.
Well, Reid, want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, for sharing with us, and yeah, it's great to talk to you as always, man.
Yes, thank you, Reid. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Look forward to seeing all the episodes in the future. I guess Luke will be up pretty soon, so you're welcome, Luke.
We're hoping.